I'm pleased to announce that any day now, my new book will be released. This book is part of the British Film Institute's Classic series, published by Bloomsbury Press. The BFI Classics series is a prestigious series, been around for a very long time. It's a series of brief books, not even 100 pages, that are devoted to one film. The books serve as an introduction to the film, also as a deep analysis of the film. In addition to being brief, the books feature beautiful images and stills from the films. Uh, the books are well written, meant for a general audience. Some of the books are indeed lyrical, literary, artistic in their own right. For instance, Salman Rushdie did a BFI classic on The Wizard of Oz. So my BFI classic is on the somewhat forgotten film Point Blank from 1967, directed by John Boorman and starring Lee Marvin and Angie Dickinson. Here is the book. You can see it's a very, very lovely cover. Marvin there on the front, lovely green. Green's an important color in the film. I'm so excited about this book coming out, and I'm going to spend a couple of talks trying to give a sense of why I think this film is so important, and why I think that you'll want to see the film, and why I think that once you see the film, you'll be interested in reading my book about the film. When I first saw Point Blank in 2017, fairly late in my life, I was at a pivotal time. I just ended a 24-year marriage, and I was on the cusp of a new relationship that has since, I'm very happy to say, developed into a new and wonderful marriage. I was in between these two lives, the old life, feeling the great pain that anyone feels after a separation/divorce, but also feeling the great hope that most feel when they have a sense that perhaps they're right on the verge of something new and fantastic. I was in London. I'd flown there to conduct research on Charles Lamb. I was writing a biography of Charles Lamb at the time. It has since been published. It's called Dream Child, A Life of Charles Lamb. I'd gotten into London. I was jet lagged. I didn't want to go to sleep, wanted to stay up the whole day to get back on a regular schedule. And I'd always been a real fan of the British Film Institute, located on the South Bank. And in past trips to London, I would show up there almost every evening and have a nice cold beer in their bar there, and just see what was ever on, because their schedules are so fantastic. Well, this night, Point Blank was on, and I thought, well, what is that? Saw that Lee Marvin was in it. I wouldn't say I was a student of Lee Marvin's acting at the time. I would say I was a fan, largely because growing up, I saw many of Lee Marvin's action films because of my dad. My dad was a huge fan of classic action films. He liked Clint Eastwood. He liked James Coburn. He liked Steve McQueen. And he liked Lee Marvin. And one of his favorite movies was The Dirty Dozen, Robert Aldrich's great film, The Dirty Dozen. So I'd seen The Dirty Dozen many times growing up. So I thought, well, I'll give this film a try. Well, it ended up being unlike any film I'd ever seen before. The way that the film plays around with time, you often can't tell what the sequence of events are. It has a very dreamy, trippy kind of feel to it. Also, it operates more through gesture than through word. It's not a silent film, of course, but language is sparse, and Boorman really lets the gestures of the actors, namely Lee Marvin, do a lot of the work. And also the film is set in Los Angeles, and the way that Los Angeles is filmed, it looks like it's on another planet. Maybe because Boorman was from England, he had a different take on Los Angeles than more of the Hollywood studio directors would have at the time. It's arid, it's stark, it's glaring, it's harsh, but yet there's an austere beauty to Los Angeles. And finally, the film, though it is an action film with violence, is ultimately a deeply psychological exploration of one man's trauma. A man who feels betrayed by his wife and best friend, who indeed plotted against him, and trying to find a way to work through that pain. So I'm watching this film at this time in my own life where I'm working through some past pain and trying to figure out a way to bridge to a more hopeful future. So I see in this hallucinogenic crime film, in a lot of ways, a reflection of some of my own psychological complexities at that time. So a little bit of background about the film. John Boorman was a documentary filmmaker in England. Somehow he got asked to direct a film about the Dave Clark Five, famous for the song "Catch Us If You Can." Well, that is the name of the film, "Catch Us If You Can," by the that features the Dave Clark Five, much as A Hard Day's Night features the Beatles. Richard Lester's film "Hard Day's Night" had just come out, was extremely successful. The studio's idea was that, well, let's do a film just like that, but let's focus on the Dave Clark Five, who are very popular right now. Well, Catch Us If You Can is not like Hard Day's Night at all. Hard Day's Night is exuberant and funny. Catch Us If You Can is a fairly grim film about undercut idealism, shot in austere black and white, and ultimately ends without the boy getting the girl, without the traditional bubblegum pop film conclusion. Well, strangely enough, this film caught the eye of the great American film critic Pauline Kael, whose assessment at the time could make or break a film or a film director. And the fact that Pauline Kael kind of liked this film, she respected its honesty, she thought its cinematography was interesting. The fact that she liked this film got a lot of Hollywood studios interested in Boorman as possibly coming to America and directing American films. This was a time when European filmmakers were hot. This was when the European New Wave was still kind of ascendant. So European directors tended to have an arty reputation, but also they were famous for getting films done on nice, modest budgets. So it turns out that eventually some producers say to Boorman, hey, there's this script based on this novel by Richard Westlake called Hunter. And it's kind of a grim crime film. And Boorman read the script, didn't think too much of it, but the producer said, hey, I've kind of got Lee Marvin interested in this. So, he's in London, you're in London, why don't you guys meet? So the two met, and Marvin had read the script too, and he said to Boorman, this script's terrible. Why are you even meeting with me? Now you got to remember, well, maybe not remember, you should know that Marvin was a very imposing figure. He was 6'2" and muscular, former soldier, granite face, steel blue eyes, prematurely gray hair. Boorman said when he walked in a room, he made everything else feel small. And so Boorman felt small already. And Marvin had just won the Academy Award for Best Actor for his film Cat Ballou, which is a comedy. It's quite terrible, I think. But he plays two roles, a kind of drunken, not so great gunfighter and a villain who has a silver nose. Not a great film, but for some reason he won Best Actor. But also this was the Marvin who'd done The Professionals, a great action film, also starring Burt Lancaster. And he was currently filming at this time, we're talking 1966, The Dirty Dozen, which would become a huge hit. So here's Boorman, who only has one tiny film to his name, sitting across the table from the biggest movie star in the world, who is also very physically imposing, and he's a no bullshit kind of guy. Marvin is to the point, he's laconic. And so when Boorman says, I don't really like the script either, the meeting ends immediately. Well, the producer, Bernard Judd, says to Boorman, "Man, you've got to seek Lee Marvin out again. You've got to do that, because I think you can sell it to him. You never express negative views about the script. You always say you're working on it. It's being revised. It's being revised." So somehow Boorman convinced Marvin to see him again. Boorman believes that Marvin saw something in Boorman. Boorman, during the first meeting, was talking about how his mother had an affair, and his father knew about it. And Boorman's voice had caught with emotion, had a lump in his throat. And Marvin noted that, Boorman thinks, and thought, well, maybe this script, which is about betrayal, might have something in it. So Boorman and Marvin meet, and they meet several more times. They start sharing drinks together. Marvin's a huge drinker. And one night, Marvin says, "I'm going to do this film. You know why?" And Boorman says, "Why?" He says, "Well, I served in World War II. I was in the Pacific Theater, and I was part of a battle in which almost all of my platoon was wiped out. I was one of a handful of survivors. I myself was shot. I was shot in the back, shot in the foot. I survived, but I have survivor's guilt. I should not have survived. All my fellow soldiers fell on that night, and I survived. And I've been living with this survivor's guilt. I feel traumatized by this war and by my experience of this war. And I see that this film is going to be about a man whose wife betrays him, whose best friend betrays him, and he is shot by his best friend. The friend is hoping to kill him. And the film is about this man trying to work through this trauma. Well, Lee Marvin thought that if I play this role and I go through the experiences of this character, I might be able to work through some of my trauma too. So that's the first thing to get about this film. Even though the film has traditional Hollywood action sequences, even though the film has major movie stars like Lee Marvin and his co-star Angie Dickinson, even though it features these kind of traditional parts of well-known Hollywood genres, thriller, crime, it's ultimately a trauma film. It's a film about someone trying to move from past trauma to a more hopeful future. And the presupposition of the film is that the great problem of trauma is that it blurs past and present. That for the traumatized person, almost every present experience somehow relates back to that past trauma. So the person is trapped in the past and keeps reliving the past, keeps reliving the trauma over and over and over. And this is one reason that the film plays around with time. There's a lot of repetition in the film because to the main character, who's called Walker in the film, the trauma in his life causes repetition in his life. So Marvin hoped that in playing this character, there'd be a therapeutic value to it. And this is part of what informs his great performance in the film, is his hope that it will be more than a Hollywood picture, that it would indeed be a psychological exercise that might offer him some healing. So that's the reason the film appealed to me on seeing it on the first time, and the reason that Lee Marvin took the film on. In future talks, I'll go into more detail about how the film plays with genre. I'll talk a little bit about Marvin's acting style. I'll talk a little bit about the cinematography, and I'll talk about Angie Dickinson, who's just wonderful in the film.